Today's lecture focuses on one of the newer and increasingly important topics in the field of environmental psychology, namely the environmental psychology of the Internet. And we're going to be taking a look at the very rapid growth in digital communications technologies over the last 2 decades, the increasing importance of virtual environments as well as place-based environments in people's lives, and the ways in which this increasing virtuality is affecting the structure of our everyday place-based environments as well as our cognition, behavior, and well-being. Now, in this next slide, you can see the exponential growth of the Internet. And these data are between 1995 and 2010. And by early 2010, there were approximately 1.7 billion Internet users in the world, or about 30% of the world's population. Today, there are over 2 billion Internet users throughout the world, and over 5 billion cell phone users. So about 70 to 80% of the world's population using cell phones. So you can see how these new technologies are penetrating various regions of the world. And in the upper right part of that slide, you see the penetration of Internet use in Asia with about 657 million users in 2010, and followed by Europe with about 393 users at that time, North America. And then in the bottom right part of the slide, you see the use of Facebook. Today, there are close to 1 billion Facebook users in the world. And back in 2010, the predominant users were in Europe, followed by North America, Asia, and Latin America. And some of those regions have their own social networking sites. So, for example, in China, there's Weibo, which is a kind of equivalent to Facebook. So you can see how that one social networking vehicle has penetrated all these different areas of the world and the increasing growth of digital communications over the last several years. Now, in 1995, Nicholas Negroponte wrote a very important book, Being Digital. And in this book, he argued that we are becoming increasingly freed up from the constraints of space and time. And in fact, we no longer have to transport our bodily atoms to go from one place to another. Instead, we can transmit images of places or images of ourselves digitally through sending megabytes or terabytes of information to users in other parts of the world. So Negroponte commented in his book that digital living will include less and less dependence on being in a specific place at a specific time, and the transmission of place itself will start to become possible. So people will rely more and more on voice messages and email messages rather than direct face-to-face communications. And what's happening from this increasing use of digital communications is we're shifting from speaking to each other in local synchronous situations where we're in a face-to-face meeting talking in real time to remote asynchronous communications where we're communicating with people in other places and not necessarily at the same time. So we'll send an email message or we'll send a voice message. They'll pick that up at their convenience and then they'll get back to us. So there's this shift in that graphic there from the upper left cell, face-to-face conversation in local synchronous places, to remote asynchronous communication, more and more reliance on email and voicemails. And this cartoon here by Randy Glassbergen comments on this kind of shift. It shows a couple of parents there sitting at the computer emailing their son who's upstairs somewhere in another part of the house, asking him to please come down and have something to eat. So you've got the shift from local synchronous to more of a remote asynchronous kind of communication. One of the things that this exponential growth of digital communications technology has brought about is the rise of virtual behavior settings. Earlier in the course, we talked about Roger Barker's theory of behavior settings as a place in which people engage in recurring activities over given periods of time. And what's happening now is that these are being supplemented or even replaced by virtual communities, by chat rooms, places where people go on the Internet to exchange information and communicate with each other. So according to Blanchard, her definition of virtual behavior settings is they are electronic sites on the Internet that are created through the shared interactions of members. And they develop a symbolic sense of space or place through sustained computer-mediated communications among participants in those sites. So we have this increasing reliance on virtual behavior settings as well as place-based behavior settings. And what this trend is doing is it's transforming several different domains of our day-to-day life. So it's affecting how we interact with families and neighbors. For example, in urban sociology, people's relationships with family members in the home and their interactions with friends in their neighborhoods were regarded as the core of their social ties or their social connectedness. Today, people are being freed up from those proximal places, and they're drawing more and more social support and connections from people based in remote places through digital communications. Also, our work life is being affected. It used to be that people would go into a particular office or factory and they'd do their work, and then they go home at the end of the day as a sort of a refuge from work. And today, more and more workplaces and residences are being fused together. So people are working online at home much more. And you can see this transformation of work life. Also, work life is spilling over into third places. So people go to Starbucks to work. They don't only go to socialize with strangers, but they actually bring their computers and they focus in on their solo computer work there. In the realm of education, in prior years, that mostly occurred in place-based classrooms and campuses. And today we have a tremendous growth of online education opportunities. So that's changing. How people meet each other to form friendships and romantic engagements is changing. It used to be that people would meet each other at parties or go to a bar. And nowadays you can go to eHarmony, you can go to speed dating sites on the web, and have the opportunity to meet a lot of people that way. So that domain has transformed greatly by this growth of digital communications and the internet. Healthcare is changing. We have telemedicine now where physicians can collaborate on a surgery even though they are based in remote places. They're not all at the surgical site. And in the realm of politics and economics, the internet is providing a basis for people to engage in social movements and political activities. And it also is a growing source of commerce. So virtual commerce now is a huge part of the world's economy. So to give a couple of examples, let's take homes and neighborhoods. Barry Wellman, who is an urban sociologist who has been studying network communities, he comments in his book that neighborhoods are not important sources of community anymore. They've become variably safe and salubrious milieu from which people sally forth in their cars, telephone from their kitchens, or email from their dens. So the neighborhood is being replaced more by virtual settings and by people's virtual Rolodexes on their cell phones, and they can access people on that Rolodex from anywhere in the world. So they don't have to be at home in their neighborhood to do that. We mentioned the hybridization of environments where you have work spilling over into third places. So that's the photo in on the left side there where you have computer workers at Starbucks doing their computer work, even though it's a third place. Also, you have first and second places merging, home and work. So you have offices now that are wired for fiber optics, so people can work online at all hours of the night, even though they're in their home setting. Universities are changing, and many believe that online education opportunities are a very valuable development because they democratize the transmission of information to people who can't come to a particular university campus, yet they can go online and they can take advantage of free courses and degree-granting courses from a variety of different sources. Now, one of the articles that you read for today by Eli Noam has a little bit more critical view of that, and he believes that it's very difficult to substitute online education completely for place-based education. So he says in his book that true teaching and learning, they're about more than information and its transmission. Education is based on mentoring, role modeling, guidance, socialization, interaction, and group activity. In these processes, physical proximity plays an important role. So to imagine medical education, for example, where you have physicians training medical students and residents, it would be very difficult to do that entirely in a chat room. You need that sort of hands-on apprentice-mentor kind of relationship. So online education doesn't work as well in all cases, according to Noam. Noam also states in his book that the strength of the future physical university lies less in pure information and more in college as a community, less in wholesale lecture and more in individual tutorial, which is very interactive, less in Cyber U and more in Goodbye Mr. Chips College. So the professor that comes into the classroom and forms relationships and mentoring experiences with students in a place-based setting rather than simply online in a chat room or something like that. Now, in the realm of friendship and romance, we see a proliferation of sites on the internet where people can go to meet others for romantic partnerships. They can go to Facebook and MySpace to meet other friends. And many people have hundreds, some thousands of virtual friends on these websites. The upper right part of that slide shows a speed dating site on the internet where people can go and look at others' pictures and email them to get together on the internet. So how people meet each other these days is quite different than in prior years where people would meet primarily in place-based settings. Now they're able to take advantage of opportunities on the internet to form friendships and romantic involvements with people virtually. And often those virtual connections lead to place-based relationships. In the area of healthcare, we see a growing reliance on telemedicine. So you have physicians working with each other in different sites and collaborating on a particular case for a patient. So you have the benefit of tapping into the knowledge and wisdom of physicians located all around the world in some cases, without them having to be in the same surgical site or the same examining room. Telewellness refers to the transmission of health promotion information to thousands and millions of people on the internet. So you can go on many sites on the internet to gain very useful information about risk prevention and health promotion. Now, it's not the case that everybody has equal access to the resources and advantages of virtual life. There's a growing rift or digital divide that's happening where you have the information rich and the information poor. And this is what we've described in prior lectures as a deviation amplifying process. The rich get richer, the information poor get poorer. As they are shut out from access to computer technology, computer equipment, they fall further and further behind the curve in terms of their employability and in terms of their knowledge of how to get along in a digital world. So this is referred to as the digital divide, and it is a deviation amplifying kind of process. And you can see in this slide that in the far left column, the world's population, and these are data from 2003 when there were about 6 billion people in the world. Today there are 7 billion. But you can see there that if you look at the light blue segment of the population, which is your high income group, they comprise 15% of the world's population. But moving to the far right column in that figure, you see that internet users are comprised of nearly 75% of high income people. So the high income folks are the ones who are predominantly using the internet. And the same holds true for use of cell phones in the third column and use of telephone lines in the second column. So there's a disproportion there in terms of the representation of very high income people in the population relative to their predominant representation in using these digital technologies. So that's an example of this. It's a reflection of the digital divide that we've been talking about. Manuel Castells, in his book, The Rise of the Network Society, comments on what he calls black holes of informational capitalism. And these are areas of the world that have been cut off from the flow of information in the global economy due to a lack of phone lines and computing infrastructure. So you've got vast regions of the world that are not connected to the internet. And this is a huge disadvantage for people living in those regions. So this is another commentary, in this case by Castells, on the digital divide. Now, all of these trends in the growth of information technology and mobile communications raises a whole host of very interesting questions for environmental psychologists. And throughout the course, we've talked about research relating to how people operate on their environments in an active way, how they interpret their environments, how they evaluate their environments, and how they respond to their environments. Focusing on the internet per se, you see, for example, in the lower left column there, where we're talking about environmental evaluation and assessment, questions such as, will greater access to simulated views of remote places weaken people's attachments to their proximal environments and relationships? So by being exposed to all of these alternatives virtually, does that weaken people's commitment to their immediate local place-based environment? That's an interesting question that's being looked at in the field. Also, if you look at the far right column, the lower part of that column, under environmental stress, how will individuals' exposure to increasing digital communications affect their susceptibility to chronic stress and related health problems? So that issue of information overload prompted by the surge of communications that we deal with each day, from our cell phones, text messages, faxes, is raising some important new questions about stress and how people cope with stress. And similarly, for ecological psychology, how might the potential conflicts between virtual behavior settings and the real environments from which they are accessed be minimized or avoided? So sometimes people bringing virtual settings into a place-based setting can cause certain conflicts, as in the case where you have an office worker who's doing web surfing and the supervisor is not too happy about that. So sometimes there are these conflicting situations that arise between the virtual and the place-based setting. So these are new questions for environmental psychologists. Now, in the area of information overload, this slide shows a variety of different measures of information. So at the smallest unit, you have the byte, B-Y-T-E, and 10 bytes is equivalent to about a single word. Then you have kilobytes, where 2 kilobytes would be equivalent to a typewritten page. 2 megabytes would be equivalent to a high-resolution photograph. And then after that, you have gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, zettabytes, and yada yada bytes. So what we're seeing here is the need to develop larger and larger units of information because of the explosion of new information, the production of new information in the world that's occurring and being facilitated by these digital technologies. When we talk about an exabyte, which is one of these new units of information, an exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes, or 10 to the 18 power of bytes. And we know that new stored information grew about 30% a year between 1999 and 2002. The bottom part of that slide asks, how big is 5 exabytes? If digitized with full formatting, the 17 million books in the Library of Congress contain about 136 terabytes of information. 5 exabytes of information is equivalent in size to the information contained in 37,000 new libraries, the size of the Library of Congress book collections. So the amount of information that's being produced is also increasing exponentially as people store information on magnetic devices, hard drives. They have multiple copies of photographs, of music. The amount of published information is increasing. So it's a huge challenge for people to keep up with this surge of information from all of these digital sources. Now, the information explosion has certain consequences for people behaviorally and cognitively. For one thing, it tends to fragment our activities. So we tend to multitask on different activities in the same place. So we might be driving and trying to text, or we might be traveling and looking at our cell phones. And trying to do too much multitasking can lead to a number of consequences in terms of dividing up our attention. And we're going to see that these effects of information overload in the next video that I want to show you, which is titled Digital Dummies. So take a look at this video as a illustration of these processes.
Indisputable. Even in young people, with all the multitasking, There's a tendency to do things faster. There's a perception that we're getting more done, but we're actually sloppy.
The scientists say when we're doing this, we're paying partial continuous attention to many tasks. It's stressful, and stress can actually shrink the brain and contribute to memory loss.
In a sense, what's happening in the brain when we're interrupted, we have to shut down one program and shift to another. A lot of work time is lost because we have to shift tasks. And I think it's important for people to be aware of their multitasking, try to limit it so they'll be more efficient, truly more efficient, not just perceiving that they're more efficient.
Still thinking you're a great multitasker? Try this awareness test. Count the number of passes the white team makes. The answer is 13. But did you notice the witch walking through the practice? Some research is showing that those who multitask a lot with technology are more easily distracted and actually have more problems remembering and juggling tasks than those who don't.
We're maybe working on the computer, but we're waiting for another buzz or ping or something that might be slightly more interesting. And so our brains are kind of on alert, waiting for new information to come in from the environment.
Your cell phone ringing, the ads on your laptop, and everything on the internet is so attractive. And what's happening is that they're destroying the central resource, which is our ability to focus. All these media are just aggressively suiting our attention, and there's just no attention left.
Despite all the evidence, a lot of people still just don't take this kind of behavior seriously.
How many accidents have you had that relate to your phone?
Oh, I don't know.
How many?
You can see it on the popular TV show, Canada's Worst Driver.
Huh?
She texts, she emails, and she constantly calls.
Hello, hello, hello. I think I'm addicted to my phone. I do.
And it's not just dialing and driving. In October 2009, on a flight from San Diego to Minneapolis, 2 Northwest airline pilots overshot the airport by 240 kilometers. They were on their laptops scheduling their hours as the plane flew past its destination. Passengers and the airline were not impressed. The pilots were suspended.
So you can see from that video that there's some very interesting and important ramifications of our trying to cope with all this information. I want to show you one other video that gets to that point.
Scientists want to find out. At Western Washington University, they've turned to a circus act for answers. Here's how the experiment works. A clown rides a unicycle around campus. Researchers watch and see which students notice.
Did you notice anything unusual?
And interview them about what they remember seeing on their walk to and from class.
You were there all the time.
60% of the students who were listening to music saw the clown.
And pairs of people do great. 70% of them, over 70% of them see the unicycling clown.
But students using cell phones, well, that was a different story.
Only 25% of them saw the unicycling clown. So they really were oblivious to their surroundings. It's what we refer to as inattentional blindness.
What's worse, The cell phone users who missed seeing the clown believed that they were aware of everything that was going on around them. Researchers say that delusion can be dangerous.
People think when they're driving with their cell phone or walking with their cell phone that they're aware of the stuff around them, but they're missing all sorts of stuff, and they don't even realize what they're missing until it's probably.
So picking up on some of the themes from those videos, Dr. Misra and I conducted a study of the effects of perceived information overload on individuals' stress, their self-reported health symptoms, and we found some interesting things. First of all, we developed a perceived information overload scale, and the sources of information overload in that scale grouped according to place-based information and cyber-based distractions. So a place-based kind of information or distraction would be the hassles sometimes created by sitting in rush hour traffic or being exposed to a lot of noise when you're trying to study at home. So these are intrusions in place-based environments. Cyber-based distractions are more related to things like getting an influx of emails that you have to respond to in a short time, getting a large number of cell phone messages or text messages that have to be accommodated and responded to. So these new pressures on people to assimilate and process digital information is on top of our day-to-day place-based distractions and sources of information. And we found that cyber-based perceived information overload was very significantly related to more reported stress, to poorer health symptoms, and less engagement in contemplative activities. And we also found some effects on those health measures and cognitive measures when we combined or looked at the combined effects of cyber-based and place-based distractions. And one other interesting finding that we saw is that the disposition of sensation seeking was a moderator of some of these effects. So people who had high sensation seeking tendency were better able to deal with perceived information overload without experiencing the greater stress or reduced health. So very interesting study in terms of the effects of people's perception of overload and the ways in which that overload is emanating from both place-based sources of distraction as well as cyber-based. Now, the Blanchard and Horn article that you read for today's class deals with another very important topic, a type of virtual behavior setting that is referred to as a virtual community. Physically based virtual communities and virtual communities of interest. So by physically based virtual community, we mean one that reinforces the social relationships in a particular place-based setting. So in our School of Social Ecology, for example, we have a listserv and newsletter that goes out by email to all members of the school, announcing faculty and student awards and interesting events coming up in the school. So that digital listserv reinforces sense of community in the campus-based School of Social Ecology. And similarly, the Blacksburg Electronic Village is a virtual network among businesses and people living in the town of Blacksburg, Virginia. So it serves to reinforce sense of community in that particular town. Now, a virtual community of interest is one where people go on the internet from very diverse locations throughout the world, and they gather at these internet sites because they share a common interest. Maybe they're seeking support for a particular health problem, or maybe they're seeking to do business on eBay, or maybe they're seeking partners to do online gaming, such as World of Warcraft. So one of the interesting questions that Blanchard and Horn pose is whether these different kinds of virtual communities, in fact, promote social capital or undermine social capital. Physically based virtual communities, they say that there's a high potential for those to reinforce social capital and to build it up in a place-based community, whereas for a community of interest, a virtual community of interest, it's not necessarily the case that that is going to contribute to social capital in a particular place, although it does create bonds among people located in various different parts of the world around a common interest. Now, some of the ways in which social capital can be impaired on the internet is through something we call false identity claims. And you remember the research by Gosling on the ways in which people make self and other directed identity claims through their postings, their decorations of their dorm rooms and residences. And similarly on the internet, people put up certain identity claims, and sometimes they don't turn out to be accurate. So in this cartoon, you've got one dog commenting, "I met someone wonderful in a chat room, and then I found out she's a cat." So this is a fairly typical phenomenon where people represent themselves rather differently than they are through their virtual persona. Other ways in which social capital can be hurt on the internet or through digital communications is through flaming. And flaming is a situation where people send very hostile, very emotional emails to a recipient, and sometimes these get sent out to a whole listserv by mistake, and so a lot of people get to see what's going on with that conflict. And sometimes people regret pushing the button and sending those notes out because when they think about it, they would prefer to have not sent it in the first place and just talk to the individual they were in conflict with to resolve the problem. So there are a number of ways in which uses of the internet can have some negative implications for social capital. Now, I want to introduce here a study done by Mark Combs, one of our TAs, and he's a PhD student in planning, policy, and design here at UCI. And he did a participant observation study of a virtual community called Second Life. And this is a pretty large virtual community on the internet with many, many thousands and millions of users, actually. And Mark developed an avatar and went in and did some observation of that site. And one of the things he was looking at when he went into Second Life is the extent to which some of the themes we've talked about in this course of environmental psychology are evident in a virtual community. So when you look at the simulated places that people construct in Second Life, do they reflect some of the environmental cognition issues that we've talked about in the class in terms of imageability and legibility? How do people in virtual communities express their personalities through their clothing or through their self-representations on the internet? So these are some things that Mark looked at in his study. So it's a pleasure at this point to welcome Mark and to have him describe his research in Second Life. So Mark?
So when we go through these slides, let's think about some environmental psychology, topics that we've seen in class, sense of community, place attachment, place identity. Those should all be familiar to you at this point. These are traditional environmental psychology concepts, how they might generalize to the structure of these virtual environments. Some of the unintended consequences of virtual communities, the positive, negative, includes the excess use of these digital devices, person-environment fit, and then behavioral mapping. So there's a lot going on here that you can draw from the core course concepts to these virtual communities. So these should all be familiar to everyone in here. MySpace has kind of fallen by the way. We probably don't have a single person here that's been on Second Life. I'm always amazed by this. Is that correct? Right. And everyone's on Facebook, right? Everybody here. Does anybody not have a Facebook page? Yeah. Okay. There you go. This really surprised me. I thought everyone would be into Second Life, this virtual community. As it turns out, it was a community that was much older and heavier, and we'll talk about why that is, why I think that is. We have these virtual communities, these massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMORPGs. This was something that was part of this group that I looked at. I was amazed at how much time they spent. Nikki at Stanford had a huge sample that looked at of people that are playing these games, and he found that 8% of a 30,000 participant sample spent 40 hours a week or more on these games. In fact, in the study that I did, one of the students that I actually interviewed ended up dropping out of UCI. He was a really bright kid, and it was completely just, this was all he wanted to do. So they're a little addictive, and I was very surprised at the intensity of this group that we collected information from. And so you can see these cities that they create. We have Beacon Hill over on the right, and one of the questions to consider here that I looked at and Shalini looked at was, are these virtual places replacing this traditional sense of place? And so I went into Second Life. I created an avatar for myself. I bought Linden dollars, and I went in and I created this avatar, and this is Second Life, and it's like the Wild Wild West. It's like ancient Rome. Anything goes in this environment. It's pretty wild. You create your own avatar. We'll go into it a little bit. This girl up on the left, that's an example of what you can do. We'll look at another picture of that. So in Second Life, what you do is you go in and you buy land and you create a city, an apartment, your own avatar, anything you want. You go in and you buy it, and all of this is exchanged hands with these Linden dollars. So you come in and you put up $10 or $15. For your $10 or $15, you get like $100,000 Linden dollars, and then you can go out and you can actually start a business and sell, intellectual, the software tools for people to create their own houses and to buy clothes, and we'll look at some of this stuff. You can actually create businesses in here and exchange your Linden dollars out for dollars. And so these are some examples of some of the living spaces that people created for themselves, and you log in. It's very computer intensive, and it's all done over the internet, but you can have your own life, your own avatar, your own house that you go to. And this is a shopping mall that you can go into, and everything that you see here, a big portion of Second Life is about your avatar, and it's just endless what you can do as you construct your avatar. You can see you can have skin tone. It's just amazing. Eye color, tattoos, body parts, how big you want to be, your gender. Yeah, and you can, at any given point, you can just automatically just hit a few buttons and change on the fly. And so all of this costs money. And so there's people that have businesses. So this person here, this micro bikini business, this is somebody that's written a program application that is selling you the software that will populate your avatar like this. So there's some commerce that's going on here as well. Here are two of my favorite avatars. You can see the skin tone, the color. The one on the right is, I must admit, I had a little bit of a crush on. I love the glasses and the tattoos and the Betty Page look. It's something that I really liked. But you can see this is very different. Very, very, very hippie. This is not normally typically what you see. And these are nice looking people. Now, the thing here with the social capital and the trust, we don't know who's behind these avatars. So that's the interesting thing. So that's the question to consider. Who is behind the avatar? Does the anonymity facilitate or hinder trust, social capital? And so you've got these are a group of avatars that are called furries, and these are people that want to live and behave like animals. Yeah, it's an odd place. And then we have some other avatars down at the end here. So one of the things, we'll look at a few of these. We'll look at a few environmental psychology concepts that I found in Second Life here. So these modes of human environment transactions. So Second Life members interpret, operate, and respond to their environment by creating Second Life islands like Luskwood. And this is Luskwood that you see down here. And it's a place where these furry avatars meet. They create these furry groups. And they have this very naturalistic setting. But what to me was more interesting was the structure that was created here. And people went to a lot of work to create this. And we see a lot of the Second Life stuff that we looked at, the imageability, the legibility. So here we see the Apollo Club, the Zurich Opera House. So I just traveled around and met people and got people to fill out my surveys is how I did this. So this is actually me floating here on the right that you see. And the QOVL stands for Quality of Virtual Life. It was the name of the research that Dr. Misra was doing. And all the billboards you see are everything that you can purchase for your avatar. And you can fly in Second Life, which is really neat. You can fly around the island. And so you can see we've got a path here. Here we've got a node. Here we've got a path in Luskwood. Here we've got an edge. These are all Second Life. So we'll just talk a little bit about the study. So what I did here is people recruited through Second Life. What you see up here in that top right-hand corner where it says Win an iPod Shuffle, that's what we did. If people filled out a survey, they got the ability to win an iPod Shuffle in this raffle that we did. They filled out this online survey that was pretty lengthy. I want to say that I had about maybe 50 people that did this. So here's some of the sample differences that we saw. You can see the overweight, the BMI readings here. So the mean age for females was 37. For males, it was 40. So this was an overweight group. That was another thing that I was very surprised about. And so some of these sense of virtual community that people expressed to me that I was able to tease out of these surveys, by large measure, the men were getting more emotional support and a sense of community than women were. So men were saying that they recognized members of the virtual community, they identified with members. Women were saying they get more emotional support. This was a virtual community versus their place-based community. Sense of obligation, sense of belonging, relationships develop. So there was a connection here to this community. These are just some correlations that we had, some different things. A lot of people that played a role. There were people that, the more you were involved in Second Life, if you had a business, if you were in part of a group, within a group, you express more commitment to the virtual community. So some of the key things that we found here, so there were self-reported higher levels of commitment to Second Life versus their place-based communities. A lot of people, substantial amount of people expressed an emotional attachment to Second Life that correlated strongly with a wide variety of virtual community place attachment and virtual community place identity measures. And a considerable portion of the sample agreed that their emotional needs were better met in a virtual community, and they found that virtual community relationships were more satisfying. So I thought that was an important distinction here that came out of this. So some unintended and consequences of virtual communities that can be negative or positive. So in virtual communities like Second Life, people are not inhibited by their appearance. Relationships can develop without being influenced by the physical environment. I think that's a positive. Social networking sites enable people to develop relationships that transcend their physical boundaries. I think that obviously is something that's positive. Virtual communities can strengthen or weaken our ties to our place-based world that can evolve into face-to-face communications. The Second Life people that I talked to, I forget what the number was, but it was substantial. Like 40% of them said that they evolved into face-to-face relationships offline. The ever-present nature of the virtual community and the devices we use for access distracts us from our everyday life. I think that's, at this point, I think it's one of the unintended consequences of just being on constantly. The thing that I am really interested in these last two points is what's happened recently. And the point that I was making earlier was that when we talked about when a lot of this work started in the Chicago School, we were going through this industrial revolution. So we're kind of going through this digital revolution now. And what's interesting is, as big as the internet was, what's even bigger is this mobile device tsunami that's going on. I mean, this internet was a big deal, but the mobile is even bigger because now you can just move and you've got it in your pocket, and you can pull out of your pocket what was considered unthinkable 15 years ago on a computer. You can now do on what you have on the device that's in your pocket. And there are literally tens of billions of dollars being spent to figure out how to monetize that.